Hello and welcome to Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort, a local Champaign-Urbana peace group. I'm Carl Estabrook. We're recording this at midday on Tuesday, August 13th, in the studios of Urbana Public Television. Recordings of earlier programs and links to the articles we refer to today can be found on the Facebook page for Aware of Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. Comments on this program are welcome. Email us at cgestabrook@gmail.com. Our program concentrates on the news of U.S. war-making, which is generally not reported, not by accident, in the U.S. media. War-making by the U.S. elite doesn't change unless we insist. The U.S. media, owned by large corporations, continue to tell us how terrible President Trump is, but that's a way to avoid talking about how terrible U.S. government war-making is. And in regard to killing people around the world, the Trump administration's policy seems little different from that of the Obama administration. President Obama inherited two shameful wars from the Bush administration in Afghanistan and Iraq. He increased the number to 8, attacking Libya, Pakistan, the Philippines, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen as well, and became the first U.S. president ever to be at war throughout 2 terms. No other president before Obama did that. Not President Roosevelt in World War II, or President Wilson in World War I, or President Lincoln in the Civil War. As Barack Obama said in 2012, after ordering drone assassinations of American citizens, including a teenager, and he did that purposely, quote, "Turns out I'm really good at killing people. Didn't know that was going to be a strong suit of mine," close quote. Barack Obama. Perhaps even more dangerously, he continued America's long-standing foreign policy, attempting to prevent the integration of Eurasia for fear that would retard the U.S. elite's economic exploitation of the rest of the world by American war provocations against Russia and China, from Ukraine to the South China Sea. Trump, after criticizing Obama's war-making, has largely continued it. Since the end of World War II, the U.S. has killed more than 20 million people in wars in Korea, Vietnam, Latin America, the Mideast, and elsewhere, designed to destroy challenges to the economic hegemony the U.S. obtained as the only major country largely undamaged by World War II. In that war, Russia lost 27 million people in defeating Nazism. U.S. losses in World War II totaled about 500,000 people. That's why today international polls show that the U.S. is the most feared government in the world, not China, Russia, Iran, or even Israel. The Trump administration is not the problem. U.S. war-making is. The rest of the world recognizes that the U.S. government remains what Martin Luther King called it long ago, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. With other peace groups around the world, we call upon our president and government to close all U.S. military bases on foreign soil. There are about 1,000 of them. Bring all U.S. troops and weapons home, and provide social supports, including medical care, education, and a universal basic income for Americans who've been made poor by generations of our government's wars. Send your opinion to your representatives in Congress. Email addresses for Senator Dick Durbin, Senator Tammy Duckworth, and Representative Rodney Davis are on our Facebook page at Aware of Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. In this program, Aware on the Air, a local discussion of war news, is on Urbana Public Television, Tuesdays at 10 p.m. and repeated, and on YouTube. The magazine Rolling Stone contains an article in the current issue, "Who's Afraid of Tulsi Gabbard?" by Matt Taibbi. Gabbard, 38, burst into headlines after a July 31st Democratic Party presidential debate when she went after California Senator Kamala Harris's record as Attorney General of the state of California. The smear campaign, Tulsi Gabbard says, it just shows that launching a smear campaign is the only response to truth. The smear campaign refers to the bizarre avalanche of negative press that ensued, negative press for Gabbard, as reporters seemed to circle wagons around Harris, a party favorite. The Gabbard-Harris exchange was brief but revealing as a window into a schism in the Democratic Party. Harris was elected Attorney General of California in 2010. She frequently sought moderate or even conservative positions on issues like criminal sentencing, drug enforcement, and prison labor. These stances were standard among Democrats back when being tough on crime was considered an essential component of the electability argument. Democrats thought they had to be tough on crime to be electable. The Democratic electorate has changed, becoming especially concerned about mass incarceration. The U.S., of course, punishes by imprisonment more people per head than any country in the world. However, the party has not quite caught up. Gabbard exposed these divisions in the July 31st event when she said, quote, she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana and then laughed about it when asked if she ever smoked marijuana. That's Gabbard on Harris. The Detroit crowd cheered all the way through Gabbard's next point about Harris blocking the introduction of DNA evidence in a murder case. The applause unnerved Harris, who looked like someone dented her car. She'd been at 20 points in a July 2nd Quinnipiac poll. After a multi-week slide that culminated with Gabbard's attack, Harris was at 7%, a distant fourth behind Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders. Having wounded a presumptive front-runner backed by nearly $25 million in campaign funds, Gabbard instantly became the subject of a slew of negative leaks, tweets, and press reports. Many of these continued the appalling recent Democratic Party tradition of denouncing anything it doesn't like as treasonous and aid to foreign enemies. Kamala Harris National Press Chair tweeted, "Yo, you love Assad," a reference to Gabbard's controversial visit with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in 2017. He then tweeted a link to an insidious February 2nd NBC News story, which asserted that Gabbard's campaign was the beneficiary of Russian bots. You can't make this stuff up. I didn't believe that when I heard it. Harris herself, meanwhile, gave a sneering interview to Anderson Cooper. Quote, "This is going to sound immodest," she said, "but as a top-tier candidate," she described herself that way, "she could only take what Gabbard says and her opinion so seriously." Close quote. She added that Gabbard was an apologist for an individual, Assad, who has murdered the people of his country like cockroaches. Close quote. The New York Times wrote Gabbard believes the United States has wrought horror on the world and that critics have called her actions un-American. Politico denounced Gabbard's, quote, Star Wars bar scene like following. That's a heck of a reference. And I'm comparing the people who supported Tulsi Gabbard to a scene in an old movie, a scene of peculiar creatures at a bar. And Politico also hissed that the Daily Stormer, a Nazi publication, was a supporter. Gabbard has repeatedly condemned white nationalism, sworn off their support. On The View, a TV program, the co-host called Gabbard a Trojan horse, while Ana Navarro viciously insinuated Gabbard, an Iraq veteran, was part of a foreign fifth column. Quote, I suspect there's something going on, said Navarro. I think she's a decent human being who served this country, but I'm paranoid, close quote. As I say, you can't make this stuff up. The campaign against Gabbard is part of another remarkable shift in the Democratic Party. Barack Obama's star began to rise as a presidential candidate 12 years ago, in 2007, when asked in a debate if he'd be willing to meet with Iran, Syria, Cuba, Venezuela, and North Korea. Obama said he would, that, quote, "It's a disgrace that we've not spoken to them." He added, "The notion that somehow not talking to countries is punishment to them, which has been the guiding diplomatic principle of the Bush administration, is ridiculous," close quote. Obama went on to cite, as Gabbard has done, the example of John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, who both met with Soviet leaders. It's true that Hillary Clinton pushed back against Obama's position in that debate, calling it irresponsible. But the moment was a key in endearing Obama to liberal voters who were tired of Bush's gunboat lunacy. The episode also helped define one of the more meaningful policy differences between Clinton and Obama. But the progressive position that meeting with dictators and our adversaries is not only defensible, but desirable, no longer has any representation in major American media. Gabbard's approach to war and intervention may be different from Obama's, and especially different from President Obama as opposed to candidate Obama, but it's not, as has been represented in most press accounts, some of which have bordered on the insane. This comically absurd passage appeared in the New York Times. Quote, "Gabbard's message, get out of foreign wars, leave other countries alone. Not everyone wants democracy," close quote. New York Times summary. The method she's chosen to get this message to a wide audience, however, is through democracy, campaigning for president as a Democrat. Forget about arguing Gabbard was a Trojan horse. This piece argued that by meeting with Assad, she was somehow opposed to democracy in general, and that this was hypocritical because she's running for president in a democratic election. This is even more preposterous than the goofball right-wing talking points arguing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is hypocritical because she espoused socialism while wearing a nice suit. Gabbard's actual views follow logically from her experience as a soldier in the Middle East and as a native of a state that went through a remarkable nuclear scare a year ago. She's not an isolationist. She's simply opposed to bombing the crap out of and occupying foreign countries for no apparent positive strategic objective beyond enriching contractors. She's like many soldiers, and embedded reporters for that matter, who return disillusioned from the Middle Eastern theater. Of concern, the extreme loss of life among both Americans and resident populations, and the outrageous profiteering amid abuse of foreign contract workers who are used to staff and service American bases. In a long-ranging interview for a new Rolling Stone-produced podcast, Gabbard spoke about her political evolution, Iraq, the 2018 nuclear scare in Hawaii, her decision to run for president, the confrontation with Harris, and the state of both the media and the Democratic Party. The full interview will be released in audio and video soon, and I will post that to the Facebook page for Aware on the Air. Here, in the meantime, are excerpts on the issue that drove her to run for the Hawaii State Legislature at the age of 21. Quote, Tulsi Gabbard, "The most populated island in the state is the island of Oahu, where I live and where I grew up. What I saw through this process as we were going around gathering signatures, getting people aware of the danger of building a landfill over a water aquifer, was how close the landfill developer was with the politicians who were greasing the wheels to get this project approved without really being the consumer protectors that they were supposed to be. So that for me was saying, hey, I can go out and gather signatures all day, but I want to be in that room where they're making the decisions." Close quote. So that was what drove me to make that decision. On her experiences in her first deployment in Iraq with a field medical unit of the Hawaii National Guard and how they started to change her mind about the war, quote, "We were lied to and we were betrayed. This really wasn't about going after al-Qaeda. This wasn't about fulfilling that mission of protecting the American people at all. It was a regime change war that was launched under the guise of national security, under the guise of humanitarianism, and look at all these atrocities that this brutal dictator has done to his own people, and done really for the benefit of corporate interests and all. Close quote. On the military's use of third country nationals on bases in Iraq, quote, we started making friends with what were called the third country nationals that were hired by KBR Halliburton to come and do things like clean the outhouses or cook the meals in the chow hall. So we'd start to make friends with them and talk with them and go outside behind the tent, started cooking rice and sharing food, and just started asking them, hey, how much are you guys making? How are you being treated? These were the foreigners hired to work for the American troops in Iraq. It was outrageous to see. I mean, hearing, oh, I get paid $500 a month to work 12-hour days, 6-7 days a week. How often do you get home to see your family? Maybe once a year, but probably every other year. And just knowing the billions of dollars these companies were making, and really to have this indentured servitude, it went to, well, this is the military-industrial complex, close quote. On her conclusions about the efficacy of foreign interventions, quote, we look at terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They've been born out of these wars and have been strengthened because of these wars and interventions. So it's made us less safe as a country. It has come at a tremendous cost to both our service members and their families. It's come at a tremendous cost to the American people, with the $6+ trillion that's been spent since 9/11 alone. Families in Flint, Michigan right now who are still being told, sorry, there's just not enough money to make sure you got clean water. We're still spending $4 billion a month in Afghanistan. Close quote. On the under-publicized Hawaii nuclear scare of 2018 and how that motivated her to run for president, Gabbard said, early on a Saturday morning, over 1 million people all across our state woke up to a warning that went out across cell phones, blaring on sirens saying, there's a missile incoming. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. Close quote. It was absolutely terrifying. Terrifying because we quickly came to realize there was no shelter. There was nowhere for our loved ones to go. And this is where we had kids on our University of Hawaii College campus sprinting in all directions, seek immediate shelter, but where do you go? Close quote. On the media reaction to her exchange with Senator Kamala Harris, it's so ridiculous that it's laughable. It's so ridiculous. But it just shows, though, that launching a smear campaign is the only response that they, the Democratic Party, have to the truth, which means they're afraid of the truth because it's real. And more people are seeing past the facade that they've built up for so long. Close quote from Tulsi Gabbard. On an NBC News story on February 2nd, asserting that she was being supported by the Russian propaganda machine, a story that appeared timed to the launch of her campaign, Gabbard said, we were contacted about that story a few days or maybe a week before my official launch for my campaign for president, and we were told it was going to come out in the week after I was going to announce my candidacy, until all of a sudden we found out when the article was posted. I think it was 2 hours before I gave my speech. On the revival of the storyline after the debate exchange with Harris, Gabbard said, I think it again is revealing about how pathetic it is that all they can respond to, when really the issue that I was raising in that debate with Senator Harris was the record that she claims to be very proud of as Attorney General, a record that she claims is about being a champion for the people. Instead of responding to that and saying why she's so proud of this, she responds with a smear campaign. Close quote. On the general practice of accusing people you disagree with of disloyalty, beginning with those who opposed the Iraq War, Gabbard said, those brave few who stood up against that vote, who stood up against the war, were accused of that. You love brutal dictators. You love Saddam Hussein. You're not a real patriot. You must not love America unless you support this war. And look at how those same attacks are being lobbed against me today for being a leading voice against the regime change war that we're continuing to wage today in Syria. Close quote. On Democrats who say they've seen the light about Iraq, Gabbard says, if you look at a lot of politicians now, it's easy and popular to say, oh, of course the Iraq war was wrong, of course, now that we're almost 20 years later from launching that war. But what about today? Where's your courage today to stand up against the regime change efforts in Syria and in other countries, frankly, that are happening right now? On the state of cooperation or lack thereof within Congress, Gabbard says, after the last votes of the week are done, it's sprinting to the car and to the airport. And I get it, because we need to get back home to our constituents and to be able to spend time with folks in our district. It really just gets to, I think, that bigger problem where there's not a will or a desire to engage with people you may disagree with, maybe on a few things or maybe a lot of things. This hyper-partisanship and putting party before people, putting politics before the well-being of the people. Close quote. On her background and how it informs her view of how to improve political dialogue in America, quote, where I come from, where we find the solution is called aloha. What aloha really means is, I come to you with respect, I come to you with love and compassion and care, and a recognition that no matter your political beliefs, what party you belong to, your race, ethnicity, religion, orientation, all of the things that are too often used to divide us, aloha is that recognition that we are all connected. That's from a Rolling Stone article this week by Matt Taibbi on Tulsi Gabbard, the Democratic Party's candidate, one of the Democratic Party's candidates for president. Gabbard will take a 2-week break from the 2020 campaign for National Guard duty, it was reported this week. Hawaii Representative Tulsi Gabbard, a Democratic presidential candidate who serves in her state's National Guard, will step away from her White House campaign to report for active duty, participating in a 2-week joint training exercise in Indonesia. Quote, we'll be doing a training exercise with the Indonesian military focused on a few different things like counterterrorism, humanitarian aid, and disaster response, and joining my brothers and sisters from the Hawaii National Guard in doing so, Gabbard told CBS News in an interview that aired Monday. Gabbard, a 3-term lawmaker, served 2 tours in the Middle East of the Hawaii Army National Guard, in Iraq from 2004 to 5, and in Kuwait from 2008 to 9. She's a member of the House Armed Services Committee and sat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee in the previous Congress. Quote, I love our country. I love being able to serve our country in so many ways, including as a soldier, Gabbard said. And so while some people are telling me, like, gosh, this is a terrible time to leave the campaign, can't you find a way out of it? You know, that's not what this is about. Close quote. Gabbard has made her military experience a centerpiece of her presidential bid, touting her qualifications to become commander-in-chief and denouncing regime change wars and the gunboat diplomacy of the past. Gabbard is among a handful of 2020 Democratic White House aspirants who are military veterans, notably South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. But they're very different in this regard. Bob Naiman writes, this is pretty damning. The Washington Post had an article, How Pete Buttigieg Went from War Protester to War Veteran. It was only after Barack Obama was elected, and just months before Buttigieg would launch his own political career, that he finally walked into the recruiting office. Only then did he decide to join a conflict that 6 years earlier he had denounced from the stage of an anti-war rally, close quote. Buttigieg set out to get his ticket punched by the military. Politico, the news website, ran a disparaging article on the candidacy of Tulsi Gabbard that our chief researcher, Jeff Nicholson comments on. Politico is way late to this, and their take is tainted by the author taking seriously something used to smear her, that she's an Assad apologist. It's important to challenge someone for the right reasons, otherwise the challenge falls flat. Her candidacy isn't substantively different from the other Democrats. She'll be a more effective shepherd if people believe the anti-war line often repeated about her. Jeff and I disagree on this point, but Jeff marshals the argument. I think Jeffrey Sinclair, he writes, already addressed her military status well before Politico did. Jeff Sinclair of Counterpunch wrote, speaking of abrasive views on Palestine, Tulsi Gabbard announced after the debate that she will be spending the next 2 weeks on a National Guard training mission in Indonesia, which is a strange way to lighten the U.S. imperial boot print on the globe. So Counterpunch's prebuttal, a neologism I came up with for a rebuttal given before the counterpoint is made, seems more apt. The whole Counterpunch page has other things more apt. Joe Biden took the stage at the debate and snapped a John reporting for duty Kerry-like salute. Meanwhile, Gabbard once again announced that she's running on the soldiers' values theme. What exactly are soldiers' values? Are soldiers so alike their thinking it makes any sense to describe their values as the same? So asks Jeff Sinclair. Then there's after being roughed up by Tulsi Gabbard, Madam Prosecutor Kamala Harris claimed that she'd always been against the death penalty, except, of course, when it mattered. Which reminds me of Gabbard being against regime change war, except for when it counts. Also covered by Jeffrey Sinclair on that same Counterpunch page. By the way, here's Gabbard pushing regime change in Ukraine in 2014. The context here is that Gabbard's bill and Obama's policy was to undermine and overthrow the legitimate government of Viktor Yanukovych. Quoting Gabbard's tweet from January 29, 2014, as Foreign Affairs Committee now passing House Resolution 447, I co-sponsored opposing violence and encouraging Ukraine to restore freedoms for their people. On Gabbard opposing war funding except for when it counts, see Gabbard on drone strikes. It's a debate that we should be having because Gabbard is, in fact, the only Democratic aspirant to the nomination for president who actually says she's opposed to U.S. war. There's an account of the campaign against her from within the Democratic Party in the publication Medium by Robbie Jaggard, entitled Tulsi Gabbard Has Enemies in High Places. There's also, I will put a link to that on the Facebook page for Aware on the Air. Lee Camp is an American stand-up comedian, writer, actor, and activist. He's the host of the weekly comedy news show Redacted Tonight with Lee Camp on RT America. Quote, I have a new web-exclusive video about new proof that Twitter and Google are sabotaging Tulsi Gabbard's campaign, writes Lee Camp. If you think these are important, please share them. And make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. Please add L Camp at RT America TV to your contact list. You've been watching Aware on the Air, produced and directed by Jason Liggett and Andrew Scollery, thanks to whom also this program and others like it will be available on YouTube and archive.org. Comments on this program are welcome. Email us at cgestabrook@gmail.com. We rely on our researcher, Jeff Nicholson, whose blog Digital Citizen we recommend highly. We steal from it regularly. There's a link to it on our Facebook page, along with his detailed notes to this program. We'll conclude tonight with videos supplied by Jeff. Aaron Mate on the program Going Underground talks about the U.S. war against Iran, sanctions our war, and the regime change war the U.S. seeks to bring against Iran, as well as the connection to Israel. Aaron Maté, on his new program, Pushback, the second piece, talks about how Russian fear-mongering continues even though the Mueller report didn't prove any collusion between the Trump campaign and Russians. In this episode, Aaron Maté interviews Stephen Cohen about Russiagate. Stephen Cohen is a principal member of the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, ex-member of the U.S. intelligence community, and a serious that group is made up of ex-members of the, quote, intelligence community. Stephen Cohen is a Russian scholar who has criticized the U.S. policy towards Russia as quite seriously. Finally, Aware honors those who reveal the crimes of the U.S. government, which the rest of the world knows about but Americans don't. Assange, Manning, Snowden, and others, who are truth-tellers persecuted by the U.S. government, and particularly our liberal Democrat Senator Durbin, a shill for the Russiagate propaganda, and unconstitutional attacks on the free press, notably in the case of WikiLeaks and the ongoing persecution of Julian Assange. Now, this is Carl Estabrook for the members and friends of AWARE, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, saying in the words of the late newsman Edward R. Murrow, good night and good luck.